Okay, so let's get holy. And bringing our awareness to our body. This is a path of embodiment. And in this manner of practice, the things that we do as practices, as our sadhana, most of it has an effect that is felt in and through the physical body, as well as subtler things like our energy bodies and more refined stuff. So, in a manner of speaking, and there's a good deal of distortion in this description, so don't get stuck in it. There are basically two modes of the spiritual path, of the real ones. And we can talk about those as the path of ascent and the path of descent. And the path of ascent is classical yoga, which actually has a fairly well-defined dualism in it, in not only its philosophy, but also in the effects of the practices, in parking the body alongside of a very pure diet and postures and things to basically chill the body out so that you can park it and go into these very refined states of awareness that are called the different states of samadhi. And in that process, as awareness becomes more refined, and one, in a sense, leaves the denser dimensions of awareness and move into the finer ones, each successive level that one departs looks like it's illusory, because in the mode, in the plane, shall we say, that you're entering, the laws, the appertaining laws are fewer, but they're also more profound. And there's also more energy. And so it makes the physical plane and then the mental plane and so forth successively look illusory until you encounter what the Sufis call Dhat, D-H-A-T, or the absolute. There's different names for it. Until that's the only realm completely outside of time, space, mind, emotion, archetype, form, any form. Everything else looks illusory. And the only thing that truly exists is the absolute. And a lot of paths say that once you reach that, you're kind of done, and all you have to do is figure out how to spend more and more time there. And the way it deals with the ego and the limitations of a human life is that you basically leave the whole shebang at the door. And then there are paths of embodiment. So Sufism, a lot of Taoism, um, traditional yoga tantra are all about embodiment. Vajrayana Buddhism. And the mind and the body are used and refined and made holy and made whole by the spiritual practice. And so that's the arc of descent. And what shows up on the arc of descent is purpose. And you learn through a direct revelatory experience why you're here and what your job is. And so while the Sufis do a lot of ascent practices, the emphasis is on the descent practices. So instead of meditating upward, Sufis meditate downward. In a nutshell. So there's a lot of work with the breath. There is work with posture, but we also integrate movement. We integrate sound, and we use that to, in a sense, alchemically transform the mind and subsequently, by extension, the body as a vehicle in the world for our realization and our purpose. And there are many different paths. There are paths of mastery, there are paths of devotion, there are paths of service. There are paths of wisdom. And the Sufi way encompasses all of those, but at least in this lineage, the one that I represent, it's a path of illumination. And that means something rather specific. And I'll read something here from my teacher, Pir Vilayat Inayat Khan. And this was given inside of a much larger, longer discourse about the whichness of what. So we're kind of breaking in on the middle of a longer discourse. And he says, beyond all the other goals that I have been talking about, realization, awakening, and so on, the most wonderful of all pursuits on the spiritual path is illumination, when the whole being becomes illuminated. It takes quite a lot of doing, but what happens to you when you experience yourself as a being of light and your consciousness as being luminous consciousness is just overwhelming. It's the highest thing that can happen to you. It seems that illumination is really the ultimate goal, and that is, in fact, the goal that we define when we give initiation. We say, toward the fulfillment of the purpose of your life, illumination. One generally forgets what one really is. Our eyes are stained by the impressions of the earth. When one rediscovers what one is, then, of course, it precipitates an awakening. And so it is a release, a shower of light that will bring about this transfiguration, to discover oneself as a being of light who has landed on the planet Earth in order to experience conditions on the Earth plane. One realizes that one's body is the physical incorporation of a body that was pure light. One's eyes begin to glow. With this, of course, comes a memory of the heavenly spheres. To carry this further, one works upon one's insight as being luminous, like a light that is cast upon all things to make things clear. In fact, one identifies no more with just being an aura, but with being a luminous consciousness, a luminous intelligence. One always has the picture of Buddha walking surrounded by a wonderful light, totally illuminated and casting the light of his understanding upon all things. That is what is meant by illumination. So there are many, many, many practices of light in the Sufi toolbox. And just historically, a lot of these were inherited from the Zoroastrians. And there's a lot of different ways that we can approach becoming illumined beings. And to really become a light worker in New Age parlance, one has to become light. Not surrounding oneself with white light or any of that bourgeois. Becoming light. And in order for that to happen, one must burn. So, centering in the heart to start with. And that's pretty much where we always start. One of the things that you'll never read about in the metaphysical bookstores about Kundalini, because they don't know it, is that there are actually two Kundalinis. There's the ascending one, and there's also a descending one, and they meet in the heart. So we always begin in the heart. And we incorporate the belly, floor of the pelvis, legs, feet. And so recall a time when you encountered an experience or a texture of actual physical light that was particularly uplifting or magical. Perhaps it's the sun coming out after many days of overcast. Or perhaps it's sunlight reflecting off of tree leaves or conifer needles, as we have here in the Northwest. There's a particular shine that our Douglas firs and some of our pines have when the sun is on them in a particular way. And the slight breeze shimmers. Or perhaps it's sunlight on ice crystals in the wintertime, shining through icicles perhaps, or reflecting off of moving water, or shining through a stream of water poured into a glass. Or maybe you've looked up towards the sun and seeing the disk of the sun out of sight behind a tree limb or the edge of a building, but you can see that corona that's shimmery and pearlescent, that's very reminiscent of the light of the inner planes. Or maybe you've been to Burning Man and you stayed up all night and got to witness the sun coming up on the desert and that very, very fine light of dawn on the desert. Any of those things, or anything else that comes to your mind about a magical experience of light. And so, with your creative imagination, bring that experience present now. We use our creative imaginations for a lot of nonsense, but this is the right use of creative imagination. And so bring that experience present. And regarding this light that is now present to you as a kind of subtle substance that you can breathe in and out of your body just the same as you're breathing air. And in fact, it is subsisting between the molecules of the air that you're breathing. And breathe this light into your heart and actually regard your heart center as being spherical so that you can indraw this light from all directions. And just keep indrawing light. Let yourself fill with it. Let it shine up into your neck and down into your belly. And even up through your neck into your brain case and down to the floor of your pelvis. Or maybe even through the floor of your pelvis and your hip joints into your legs. And up through your brain case, through the top of your head. And just spend a few breaths experiencing what it's like to breathe light. And the finer your concentration in this process, the more you can really sink into this process. The more real this will become until it takes on a very living immediacy. And the Sufis have these power words, which are spoken of as names of God, air quotes, but they're really qualities and directions of the one consciousness. And we use these names as mantra. And the word for light is nur in all of its different aspects of light. So if you wish, you can think the word nur, N-O-O-R, as you inhale. You can also think nur as you exhale. And notice how or if that has any effect on your experience. And here's an alternative. Instead of breathing in and out your heart, inhale from above your head, all the way down through your brain case, your neck, your torso, your viscera, all the way down to the floor of your pelvis. And if you wish, even all the way down to your knees and feet, thinking newer. So indrawing light through the top of the head, all the way down through your body. And then on the exhale, anything that's not light, any confusion, muddiness, pain, contraction, worry, self-consciousness, anything that's denser than pure light, let it just drain out of you into the earth. And the earth gladly receives our dross. The earth uses it as a kind of fertilizer for the earth's own alchemy. Or if you wish, you can imagine a spotlight at the top of your head, shining all the way down through you as you inhale. And as you exhale, it simply dissolves any shadows. So these are all different ways of breathing light, and there's more. And you can use this, the word nur, at any time, except driving in traffic. Would not advise that. Or running power tools or wielding sharp knives. And it's particularly important in the time of COVID that we do practices of light, not just for ourselves, but for everyone around us. And it is a great service to the people around us who may not have the privilege of doing spiritual practice. And who may be very susceptible to the negativity and the, for lack of a better term, darkness, and the polarization. And at the very least, we can serve everyone around us by not adding to their darkness. But even more so, as this light begins to really become resident in us and to inform our thoughts, our feelings, our decisions, our vibration, our atmosphere, It's very helpful to everyone around us and to the whole mental sphere that human beings consciously or unconsciously partake in. So there's another practice that we can do. An elaboration of breathing light. And as I mentioned earlier, there's work with movement. And these movements, in a sense, stir our aura the way Qigong stirs our subtle bodies. So this is Sufi Qigong or Sufi Light Gung, if you will. And so the motion of the head and the upper body is a 3/4 circle, starting at the left always. 3/4 circle. And you're actually bending at the waist. And then the head comes down vertically, or depending on what you're doing, sometimes the head comes down slightly diagonally, and the focus is into the physical heart. And so we'll add to that motion a pair of Sufi power words. One of them is Nur, and the other is Munawar, Munawwir. And Munawar is the vessel or the vehicle or the conduit of light. And so through the conduit of light, we become a lamp. And so I'll demonstrate the practice 3 times and join me on the 4th one. So we're still breathing light. And on the 3/4 circle, we are radiating light from the heart. And then as the head comes down, we're indrawing more light. And then the next repetition, we're casting that light into our aura and into the room around us, and then bringing down more light. And we just keep doing that. No. 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 And pause. And just notice your experience. In Sufi practice, there's no supposed to. We're Sufis. We're not supposed to anything. There's just what we experience in this moment. Because we can only start from where we are. We can't start from where we're not. So the question, maybe it arises in one's mind, but set it aside, the question of what am I supposed to be experiencing? You experience what you experience. And in the holing, WHOLE-ing, that is yourself, whatever you experience and whoever you are in this moment is the perfect place from which to engage the next thing, whatever that happens to be. So just notice your experience. Practices of light can get us really stoned, but that's not their purpose. Their purpose is to become light. And that's a thing that happens through grace. By simply getting enough out of our own way that the practice takes root. So let's continue. Oh, no. No. Oh, no. and pause. And just be with your experience. And there's all kinds of experiences that one can have in spiritual practice. And it takes great discrimination to know whether the experience you're having is just road noise on the journey, or a billboard for the spiritual tourist trap that's up the road a piece. There's plenty of those. Or whether the experience is simply an indication that there's movement. And sometimes the path forward means moving beyond some really exquisite experiences in order to encounter deeper truth. And so one of the great initiations on the spiritual path is when all other motivations fall away and you persist on the path and doing the practices for the pure love of truth. You don't even want experiences anymore. You just need the truth like you need to breathe. So let's continue. And I did mention that this starts on the left shoulder. Indrawing light from the crown. Bringing more light down. Oh no. Casting the light of your heart as far as possible in all directions. Now we're bringing down more light. Last time. Just noticing your experience. And if you wish, you can put those words into the swing of your breath silently. Inhale, thinking the word munawar. Exhale, thinking the word nur. And to continue radiating light in all directions and indrawing light down from the crown. Do that for 11 breaths. And now dropping the subvocal repetition of the words munawar and nur. And just continue breathing light and drawing from the crown, radiating from the heart. And if you find that the thinking of these words wants to stay with you, then allow that. this can become like a little prayer wheel, just continually turning in the heart, indrawing light, radiating light. And depending upon your susceptibility, it might be best to do this in the morning before you set off into your day. Or you might find that it just makes you too spacey, in which case you can do it right before your head hits the pillow. And you can find this practice informing your dreams. So, are there any questions about this or about anything else we've done this evening? The floor is open. Also, comments. And I should mention, move gently. You may find yourself in a very sensitized condition after doing this practice.
Quick question for you. In doing this practice, typically I inhale and think newer and exhale, well, exactly opposite what you said today. So inhale newer, exhale an hour.
I know.
Any particular?
They're just different ways of doing the same thing. I often will do one mode, 33 times or whatever, and then I'll do the other one. It just kind of depends. So I usually give it the way that you just spoke of it, but it came to me tonight to do it this way.
Okay, thanks.
I have a question. I am doing this for the first time. Is it important to count and to stay with numbers?
I think it's helpful. There is a numerology in the numbers of repetitions. That's why Sufis have prayer beads. It's for the same reasons that Roman Catholics have rosaries and yogis have malas, basically for counting prayers. And yeah, I think it's very helpful. I've also had teachers who will just say, do this for 15 minutes. So I use my prayer beads because I find it helpful and I can't keep track any other way, even on my fingers.
That's what happened to me. Like after a few rounds, I just lost the numbers. And it might be because here it's like midnight. So I'm in a twilighty kind of state of consciousness. And
which is perfect.
it felt pretty perfect. And I might need some prayer beads. That would probably be helpful in grounding.
Uh, it's it's helpful in grounding, embodying. Um, and the beads begin to get magnetized with the vibration of your practice. And so just picking them up tends to, after a while, it just kind of gives you a little boost. It's also important not to make a fetish about that. You know, there's people who, you know, just make it a little bit too precious. It's a tool. It's a traditional tool, but it's still a tool. Practices with light help a very great deal in resilience, which is an increasingly rare commodity these days. The light practices can usher you into an experience of your own eternity and a direct experience of having always been a being of pure light that is fundamentally untouched by the petty insults and injuries of this human incarnation. And then that experience makes it much easier to both drop what no longer serves us, but also a place from which to a standpoint, a point of view, a mode of being that allows us to engage the trauma to the ego, to the personality, to the body, and heal that in a much more direct way. And, you know, we're one of the things that stands in the way of people healing trauma is the fear that they will be overwhelmed by the re-experience of the trauma. And that's realistic. And these different levels of rediscovery of ourselves, of the different levels of our own transcendence can provide tremendous support for engaging our own wounds. We're just not so identified with them. And I do not recommend trying to bypass those wounds by just hanging out in the light. You know, there are paths that do that. But those are mostly monks that do that kind of thing. And you can get really detached from the life's wounding and all of the karmic stuff that goes with that. Whether it may still be waiting for you when you finally get the cosmic eviction notice, it's a question. Yeah, because these things are actually stored in the body at a cellular level. It's stored in the muscles, it's stored in the connective tissue. And it's stored in the collagen. And so there has to be and should be a mode by which we can like slowly release that. And sometimes these practices do that. And it's not uncommon for people to go on a personal or a group retreat and have their felt identity so profoundly changed and expanded and refined that patterns that have been a problem for literally decades just fall away. You put it down and you don't pick it up again because you're no longer the person for whom all of that stuff was a defense.
This is resonating for me around working with plant medicines. I was a facilitator for a good number of years with ayahuasca, San Pedro,
Mhm.
and that purge seems to like pull up, what needs to be released. And for some people, it would be pretty terrifying, but it was almost the sense of being able to, witness this release and not get fascinated with getting re-engaged with it in a sense. And then if that letting go was, kind of completed in the ceremony or ceremonies, it was almost like you'd see a different face. The person's face would look different. Their gestures, their way of just being present,
Yeah.
changed.
Yeah. It's true. And Sufis have experienced the same thing with retreat. It's really amazing what human beings will do when they have the right support. And it's equally amazing how long people will stay stuck when they don't have that support. One possible advantage of just having a toolbox full of mantra and breath practices is that one can do that anywhere. You can do it on your breath as you're riding the bus and nobody knows that you're not just taking a snooze or thinking about stuff. Unless, of course, they have the eyes to see, in which case, if you see them seeing you, then you should introduce yourself. So what we're calling in the first quarter of the 21st century releasing trauma is part of what's in the various spiritual traditions, part of the conversation about, air quotes, purification. And purification is not getting rid of something that's unholy about yourself. It's not it at all. Maybe religious people think of it that way, but that's not really what the conversation is about. So everyone has, or everyone intrinsically is a pure being. And I won't even say that it's our higher self, because we don't have a higher self, because we don't have a lower self. That's a dualistic point of view that really isn't part of this path, although it may be in others. We're risen apes and we're also descended angels, not fallen angels. And there's purpose to all of it. And some people on retreat will recover the memory of making the decision to engage this current human incarnation and why we came here. And so purification is releasing ourselves of everything that does not properly belong to us. And so pure salt is pure salt. Pure water is pure water. They're very different in their character, but they're equally pure. When you have pure water, there's nothing added to it. And we can access that perspective about ourselves through which we perceive that all of the stuff, including the body that we have and that we've experienced and which has shaped us, is really external to our real being. It is accrued to us and viewed from the perspective of our real being, we can make some informed choices about what to jettison and what to keep. And how it is that we want to articulate the stuff that we do keep as part of our being in the world, living our purpose. And we don't have to have a name for that purpose. It's a felt thing. It's a navigational fix rather than a destination. It's like if I'm going to sail a boat, if I had a boat, from Seattle to Honolulu, I would be taking a navigational fix on the North Star. And so the purpose isn't the North Star, but it helps me navigate to where I'm headed. So any more questions or comments?
I really appreciate what you just said. I've had this, what I guess I would describe as a strange I don't know, it's kind of like a different kind of navigation in the world without goals, without achievement. You know, I had a
Mhm.
pretty structured life at one point, but now it feels almost like untethered.
Yeah.
So I walk around like I was in New York and I got this call to go to Hell's Kitchen. I could tell you this big, hairy story, but essentially I kind of could see myself there. And then I was getting these like very bizarre coincidences, connections to things in my life, like names, and even a person I worked with, they named a building after him. And it was a veteran center for addicts. And that's the kind of work I used to love. I really love working on the street, outreach, that kind of thing. But it's strange because it wasn't like I went to New York to do that. It's like
Mhm.
lately I'm just going around, and it's almost like this sense of maybe magnetism
Mhm.
to a situation or to a person. And that seems to be the like becoming prevalent, which is why I wanted to, you know, find somebody to work with, because it feels like the pull is more toward alignment than
Mhm.
fulfillment or something like that.
Yeah.
And so that's a shift. That's a shift. And I'm, you know, intrigued by that, but I'm trusting it. And you know, I
Mhm.
don't even know what happened, but it's almost like this nomadic kind of like guidance or something.
Well, yeah. Um, One of the things that happens in an authentic spiritual unfoldment is the collapse of all of the false will that this culture inculcates and conditions us into. And there's a period for most people when that happens of feeling a little bit rudderless, and yet the rudderlessness, I mean, for some people, it's a little freakish, but it's often just okay. Like, all right, you know, all right, God, whatevs. And that can be enormously freeing, even though um, it doesn't work well in this very goal oriented society where all the coaches and all the books and all the seminars are telling you to, do vision boards and set goals and, and all that stuff. Um, the ugly underside of that being the promoters of those kinds of things who, really want you to buy their book. Um, so, so yeah, you're doing fine.
I'm actually loving it. It feels like currents of joy more than anything. You
Mhm.
know, if I'm aligned with, and that word keeps coming up for me, it's like focusing on alignment as an intention. And
Mhm.
as I'm able to do that, and as I call on, you know, like divine guidance or, however you might describe it, it feels like there's an illumination. Like I can never plan ahead, but once I start moving out into the world, things just arise or open up. And
Mhm. Mhm.
it's been really so beautiful. But it's like a magical mystery tour now, because I don't really know where I'm going to end up in the world. It just feels like, and I'm good with that. But it's just very different, especially in this culture.
Yeah.
It feels very strange. It's like a beautiful alienation, but it's an alienation.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, and it's alive.
Yeah, juicy, like Hildegard of Bingham would say.
Mhm.
Yes,
It's juicy.
it is juicy.
So I don't have any wise stuff to say from here on. I think I'm done. So move gently. Be gentle with yourself. Always be gentle with yourself in times of great change. Good night.
Good night. Much appreciation. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. We'll talk soon.
Yes, I'd appreciate that. It's good to meet you, Zach.